The Decline of the Moguls. The children of great men, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, his magnificence, his fall, Aurangzeb, his fanaticism, his death, the coming of the British. The children who had waited so impatiently for his death found it difficult to hold together the empire that had been created by his genius. Why is it that great men so often have mediocrities for their offspring? Is it because the gamble of the genes that produced them, the commingling of ancestral traits and biological possibilities, was but a chance, and could not be expected to recur? Or is it because the genius exhausts in thought and toil the force that might have gone to parentage, and leaves them only his diluted blood? Or is it that children decay with under ease, and early good fortune deprives them of the stimulus to growth and ambition? Jahangir was not so much a mediocrity as an able degenerate. Born of a Hindu princess and a Turkish father, he enjoyed all the opportunities of an heir apparent, indulged himself in alcohol and lechery, and gave full vent to that sadistic joy and cruelty which had been a recessive character in Babur, Humayun, and Akbar, but had always lurked in the Tatar blood. He took delight in seeing men flayed alive, impaled, or torn to pieces by elephants. In his memoirs, he tells how, because their careless entrance upon the scene startled his quarry in a hunt, he had a groom killed, and the groom's servants hamstrung, i.e., crippled for life by severing the tendons behind the knees. Having attended to this, he says, I continued hunting. When his son Khusru conspired against him, he had 700 supporters of the rebel impaled in a line along the streets of Lahore, and he remarks with pleasure on the length of time it took these men to die. His sexual life was attended to by a harem of 6,000 women, engraced by his later attachment to his favorite wife, Nur Jahan, whom he acquired by murdering her husband. Nur Jahan means light of the world. She was also called Nur Mahal, light of the palace. Jahangir means conqueror of the world. Shah Jahan, of course, is king of the world. His administration of justice was impartial as well as severe, but the extravagance of his expenditures laid a heavy burden upon a nation which had become the most prosperous on the globe through the wise leadership of Akbar and many years of peace. Toward the end of his reign, Jahangir took more and more to his cups and neglected the tasks of government. Inevitably, conspiracies arose to replace him. Already in 1622, his son Jahan had tried to seize the throne. When Jahangir died, Jahan hurried up from the Deccan where he had been hiding, proclaimed himself emperor, and murdered all his brothers to ensure his peace of mind. His father passed on to him his habits of intemperance, extravagance, and cruelty. The expenses of Jahan's court, and the high salaries of his innumerable officials, absorbed more and more of the revenue produced by the thriving industry and commerce of the people. The religious tolerance of Akbar and the indifference of Jahangir were replaced by a return to the Muslim faith, the persecution of Christians, and the ruthless and wholesale destruction of Hindu shrines. Shah Jahan redeemed himself in some measure by his generosity to his friends and the poor, his artistic taste and passion in adorning India with the fairest architecture that it had ever seen, and his devotion to his wife, Mumtaz Mahal, ornament of the palace. He had married her in his 21st year, when he had already had 2 children by an earlier consort. Mumtaz gave her tireless husband 14 children in 18 years, and died at the age of 39 in bringing forth the last. Shah Jahan built the immaculate Taj Mahal as a monument to her memory and her fertility, and relapsed into a scandalous licentiousness. The most beautiful of all the world's tombs was but one of 100 masterpieces that Jahan erected, chiefly at Agra, and in that New Delhi which grew up under his planning. The costliness of these palaces, the luxuriousness of the court, the extravagant jewelry of the peacock throne would suggest a rate of taxation ruinous to India. Nevertheless, though one of the worst famines in India's history occurred in Shah Jahan's reign, his 30 years of government marked the zenith of India's prosperity and prestige. The lordly Shah was a capable ruler, and though he wasted many lives in foreign war, he gave his own land a full generation of peace. As the great British administrator of Bombay, Mount Stuart Elphinstone, wrote, "Those who look on India in its present state may be inclined to suspect the native writers of exaggerating its former prosperity. But the deserted cities, ruined palaces, and choked-up aqueducts which we still see, with the great reservoirs and embankments in the midst of jungles, in the decayed causeways, wells, and caravanserai of royal roads, concur with the evidence of contemporary travelers in convincing us that those historians had good grounds for their commendation." Jahan had begun his reign by killing his brothers, but he had neglected to kill his sons, one of whom was destined to overthrow him. In 1657, the ablest of these, Aurangzeb, led an insurrection from the Deccan. The Shah, like David, gave instructions to his generals to defeat the rebel army, but to spare, if possible, the life of his son. Aurangzeb overcame all the forces sent against him, captured his father, and imprisoned him in the fort of Agra. For 9 bitter years, the deposed king lingered there, never visited by his son, attended only by his faithful daughter, Jahanara, and spending his days looking from the jasmine tower of his prison across the Jumna to where his once beloved Mumtaz lay in her jeweled tomb. The son who so ruthlessly deposed him was one of the greatest saints in the history of Islam, and perhaps the most nearly unique of the Mughal emperors. The mullahs who had educated him had so imbibed him with religion that at one time the young prince had thought of renouncing the empire and the world and becoming a religious recluse. Throughout his life, despite his despotism, his subtle diplomacy, and a conception of morals as applying only to his own sect, he remained a pious Muslim, reading prayers at great length, memorizing the entire Quran, and warring against infidelity. He spent hours in devotion, and days in fasts. For the most part, he practiced his religion as earnestly as he professed it. It is true that in politics he was cold and calculating, capable of lying cleverly for his God and his country. But he was the least cruel of the Mughals, and the mildest. Slaughter abated in his reign, and he made hardly any use of punishment in dealing with crime. He was consistently humble in deportment, patient under provocation, and resigned in misfortune. He abstained scrupulously from all food, drink, or luxury forbidden by his faith. Though skilled in music, he abandoned it as a sensual pleasure, and apparently he carried out his resolve to spend nothing upon himself, save what he had been able to earn by the labor of his hands. He was a Saint Augustine on the throne. Shah Jahan had given half his revenues to the promotion of the arts and architecture. Aurangzeb cared nothing for these, destroyed its heathen monuments with coarse bigotry, and fought, through a reign of half a century, to eradicate from India almost all religions but his own. He issued orders to the provincial governors and to his other subordinates to raze to the ground all the temples of either Christians or Hindus, to smash every idol, and to close every Hindu school. In 1 year, 1679 to 1680, 66 temples were broken to pieces in Amber alone, 63 in Chittor, 123 at Udaipur, and over the site of a Benares temple especially sacred to the Hindus, he built in deliberate insult, a Mohammedan mosque. He forbade all public worship of the Hindu faiths, and laid upon every unconverted Hindu a heavy capitation tax. As a result of his fanaticism, thousands of the temples which had represented or housed the art of India through a millennium were laid in ruins. We can never know, from looking at India today, what beauty and grandeur she once possessed. Aurangzeb converted a handful of timid Hindus to Islam, but he wrecked his dynasty and his country. A few Muslims worshipped him as a saint, but the mute and terrorized millions of India looked upon him as a monster, fled from his tax gatherers, and prayed for his death. During his reign, the Mughal Empire in India reached its height, extending into the Deccan, but it was a power that had no foundation in the affection of the people, and was doomed to fall at the first hostile and vigorous touch. The emperor himself, in his last years, began to realize that by the very narrowness of his piety, he had destroyed the heritage of his fathers. His deathbed letters are pitiful documents. I know not who I am, where I shall go, or what will happen to this sinner full of sins. My years have gone by profitless. God has been in my heart, yet my darkened eyes have not recognized his light. There is no hope for me in the future. The fever is gone, but only the skin is left. I have greatly sinned, and know not what torments await me. May the peace of God be upon you. He left instructions that his funeral should be ascetically simple, in that no money should be spent on his shroud except the 4 rupees that he had made by sewing caps. The top of his coffin was to be covered with a plain piece of canvas. To the poor, he left 300 rupees earned by copying the Quran. He died at the age of 89, having long outstayed his welcome on the earth. Within 17 years of his death, his empire was broken into fragments. The support of the people, so wisely won by Akbar, had been forfeited by the cruelty of Jahangir, the wastefulness of Jahan, and the intolerance of Aurangzeb. The Muslim minority, already enervated by India's heat, had lost the military ardor and physical vigor of their prime, and no fresh recruits were coming from the north to buttress their declining power. Meanwhile, far away in the west, a little island had sent its traders to cull the riches of India. Soon it would send its guns, and take over this immense empire in which Hindu and Muslim had joined to build one of the greatest civilizations of history.